Hi, this is Ben Hauck. I am author of the book Long-Form Improv, a complete guide to creating characters, sustaining scenes, and performing extraordinary heralds. What does that word even mean? Extraordinary heralds? That's what the chapter is that we're going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about chapter 5, which is titled The Structure of Heralds. And the structure of heralds, what is a herald? Well, in short, a herald is the most popular form of structured long-form improvisation that you're probably going to see. There are different kinds of long-form improv. People are inventing things all the time. But the one that you may know of or see when you go see something called long-form improv is a herald. What is a herald? Well, a herald, what's the history of it? I'll leave it to other books that I have up here, other authors. Talk about the history of a herald, but just in short, it was developed by a guy named Del Close and developed by a woman named Charna Halpern. They both worked together to create what the basic form is now. And the form varies a little bit here and there, and this is the one that I teach in the book, and I'll teach to you right now. So, I'll give you a quick overview of what a herald looks like and sounds like. A herald consists of, let's say you have about 7 actors on a stage, 7 improvisers. They head up on a stage and they say they're going to perform a herald. This is what more or less they're going to perform. It's going to start, the show's going to start off with the solicitation of an audience suggestion. It's going to follow with ideation, which is typically referred to as an opening, but I prefer to call it ideation. And then it follows with 3 two-person scenes. These 3 two-person scenes are referred to as the first beat. Then moves to a group scene where pretty much everyone in the on the improv team participates in this group scene. And then we go on to 3 more two-person scenes, referred to as the second beat. We have yet another group scene. And finally, we go to the third beat, which is more or less 3 two-person scenes. So that's the big overview of what a herald is. Now let's get into the little nitty-gritty. That's the structure of it. What is that nitty-gritty? So it usually, as I said, it usually has about 7 actors who do a herald. It can be more, it can be less. If you have fewer, you have a little bit more responsibility, and you're playing more characters. You have to do a lot more as a team. You have to function probably a lot harder. I've even seen heralds done with 1 actor. I've even seen heralds done with maybe 10 actors. Those ones don't seem to go as well because the actors don't get as much an opportunity to play characters because there's more actors on stage and things get a little bit messy. So it's about 7. 7 seems to be a good amount. When you see a herald, oftentimes you see the improvisers will come out and take the stage. The actors will take the stage, maybe in a frenzy, maybe all calm, cool, and collected, and they'll come out. One will step out from the group and say, "Hello, we are the great improvisers. May I have a single word for a suggestion," or something like that. They'll ask for a suggestion from the audience. And oftentimes it's a single word, but it can be anything. I'd like the name of a city. I'd like the name of a state. I'd like the name of a state or an emotion. I'd like this. What's the first thing you had? What's the thing you had for breakfast this morning? What's something a lover said to you? I don't know. You can ask for anything you want. But I think it's pure estate. You ask for a suggestion, a single word, or maybe a phrase. And that thing that you get from the audience is called the suggestion. Now let's take the example. Let's say our audience, our mythical audience out there and around you as you're sitting watching this, said the word postcard. Postcard. Thank you. Postcard. Everyone else in the group says it aloud together, postcard, and then we move on to the next part, which I said is referred to as ideation, which is more typically referred to as an opening. Now, why do I call this opening ideation? I call it the ideation for this reason, because the word opening doesn't suggest the function of an opening in a herald, and the word ideation actually does suggest the function of it in a herald. During ideation, you take the suggestion that you've gotten from the audience, postcard, and you use that suggestion, postcard, to develop more ideas, to generate better ideas. The typical way that is done is through some word association game. It's not required. You can do any different way to develop and generate more ideas off the suggestion, but typically it's a word association game. So let me give you an example. Say you've gotten the word postcard. Say you have a group of 7 actors on stage. Someone will say the word postcard, and then someone else will say the first thing that comes to mind when he or she hears postcard, and maybe it's letter. And then the next person will hear the word letter, and then maybe another person will say alphabet, and then another person will say Greek, and another person will say Roman, and another person will say Rowan, and another person will say Atkinson, and another person will say, it just goes like that. It starts generating a big pool of ideas. So during ideation, we're developing a pool of ideas, and this will serve a function for the herald. This pool of ideas that we use helps to feed the ideas for the scenes that we improvise within the herald. It's very simple. The better you are at developing ideas during the ideation phase of a herald, usually the easier your long-form improvisation goes. Let's see. So, what else? What else? What else? Now, the ideas that you use, that you generate, this pool of ideas, are they feed the scenes. It's not just a suggestion. You're not going to have 9 improvised scenes all about the suggestion of postcard. But instead, you might have one scene that has to do with the alphabet. You might have one scene between 2 Roman soldiers. You might have another scene that takes place at a Greek restaurant. This pool of ideas are what feeds your scenes. Now, if a herald, this is an interesting point, if a herald is anything like a play, and if a play has no waste, then your herald has no waste. So what that means is every idea that you invite into your opening, into your ideation, is, in theory, should be used over the course of your herald. If you can imagine that if your ideation phase went for 7 minutes and you were developing ideas for 7 minutes of time, your obligation would be to use 7 minutes worth of ideas over the course of your herald. I should say that a herald typically lasts about 25 to 30 minutes. So, if you do 7 minutes of ideation and you develop 7 minutes of ideas, that leaves you with 18 minutes of scene in which you're trying to fit all these ideas again. It's a little overwhelming. But an ideation can be as little as 10 seconds, as 30 seconds, whatever. There's no real set time limit for an ideation. You just need enough ideas to help propel your scenes. All right, enough about ideation. Let us move on to the next part. Right after ideation, someone runs across the stage, typically, in what is known as an edit, and that's specifically like a wipe. That kind of edit is known as a wipe. You have the actors on stage, and one of them decides to run around. That's an edit. And then they all move to what is called the back line. That edit is a cue for them to move on to the next scenes, and that's used throughout a herald to move the scenes along. So, next step after that edit becomes the first scene. Usually the first scene of the first beat, and usually the scenes in the first beat have 2 characters apiece in them, and they're usually performed, usually no actor repeats him or herself in the course of these scenes. So let's say you had 7 improvisers, 6 of the improvisers end up in the scenes, and 1 maybe doesn't end up in one of the first beat scenes. But each of these scenes is as disparate and different as possible. They are unrelated. Now, we've expressed that the theme of tied togetherness is very important in a play, and therefore important in long-form improv, but we don't want to just start connecting scenes just yet. We want to hold off. So the scenes are disparate, disconnected. The audience has no sense of the connection amongst these characters. We have that one scene that has to do with the alphabet, that one scene amongst Roman soldiers, and one scene in a Greek restaurant. There's no indication that these worlds these characters are in are related. After there's an edit amongst between each of those scenes, after the third scene, which we call maybe C1, and the first one's A1 and B1, after C1 we move into a group scene. It's typically referred to as a group game, which I find a somewhat limiting term, and I find group scene a little bit more general. A group scene typically involves all of the improvisers, all of the actors who are on the team. They all somehow participate in the scene. They may all en masse enter the scene. They may one at a time enter the scene. Maybe 3 of them enter the scene, then a 4th one comes in, then 5 and 6 come in later, and maybe 7 doesn't make it in, or maybe 7 does the edit. Whatever. It usually involves all the people. And that's also very different than the other 3 scenes that have preceded it. An edit comes out of that group scene, and then we enter the second beat of scenes. And the second beat of scenes is interesting, because then we start to see the characters again. The characters that were in scene A1 are now in scene A2. And there's a difference between A1 and A2. There's what's known as a time dash, or just more simply put, some amount of time has passed between that first scene and that second scene between the characters. Maybe their story is furthered. Maybe it's minutes later. Maybe it's hours later. Maybe it's days later. Maybe it's even years later. Or maybe it's a year prior. Maybe it's 2 years prior. Maybe it's minutes prior. You usually don't see a time dash going backwards in time. It can happen. Usually they're going forward in time. So the first beat of scenes has a whole bunch of characters. The second beat has the same characters, yet there's a time dash employed, meaning that they furthered along their story. We do similarly. We do edits and edits and edits amongst them. But there's another interesting thing about the second beat of scenes. Maybe at this point, ties between the characters or the scenes start to emerge. Nothing heavy, nothing huge, just an indication for the audience that maybe there's something, maybe these different worlds are actually not as disparate and different as they seem. Maybe, say, in the alphabet scene, there are 2 kids learning the alphabet, and we learn that maybe their mommy works at a Greek restaurant as a waitress. And that comes out later. That comes out in the second beat. Or maybe the 2 Roman soldiers, we learn that they maybe dabble in linguistics. And maybe that's an indication somehow that they're going to have something to do with alphabet later on. You're just hinting at things usually in the second beat. After C2, we edit and we go to the second group scene. In the second group scene, it has nothing to do with any of the scenes prior. It's a completely new, different thing. At this point, we've used different ideas from our pool of ideas that we've developed in ideation. In this part of the Herald, we've mostly dwelled on just the ideas, not the actual suggestion postcard. Maybe, hopefully, maybe sometimes postcards shown up, but maybe it hasn't. If it hasn't, in the second group scene, it is at this point that maybe postcard actually becomes explicitly used in the Herald. Maybe not, but maybe it does. It's on your mind. We edit out of the second group scene and we go into the third beat, which is the 3 scenes. We're seeing the characters yet again, yet the walls between these scenes can break down. And sometimes we can do crazier, different things. The scenes aren't so necessarily segmented and different from each other. Maybe we start off with the characters of A1, who are also in A2, and we're now in A3. We start off with them, but maybe there's a walk-on by a character who was in B2. Or maybe there was another one from C1 who comes back. Or maybe we move on to let's see, B3, and someone from A1 walks into that scene. And maybe a lot of different characters show up and we edit out of that. Who knows? It becomes a lot crazier and more amorphous as we try to tie different things together. And that's what happens in that third beat. The theme of tied togetherness becomes so amazingly expressed in this beat, and thereby expressed by the whole Herald, that it becomes shocking and awesome to the audience, and perhaps even to you as you're performing your Herald. The audience is shocked and more in awe of the Herald the less connection you draw early on and the more connection you draw later on. So you want to avoid in a Herald having a lot of connections early on, and you want to delay it and only hint at them in the middle of it and let them come together at the end. So that's a lot of what the Herald is. That covers it. Pretty much, I think, all that you really need to know for now. We're going to go on next to Chapter 6. This was Chapter 5 of Long-Form Improv by Ben Hauck, the complete guide to creating characters, sustaining scenes, and performing extraordinary heralds, which I think you'll buy sometime with this generous... with this generous series. I need to stop this video right now. Bye.